Ian Collins, weekday afternoons from 1 on Talk Radio.
Lots to get through in this section, and we will go back to those the story of the sentencing of the killers of PC Harper. We now know that they have been jailed. PC Andrew Harper died when he suffered catastrophic injuries as his ankles were caught in a strap attached to the vehicle. The driver, Henry Long, has been jailed for 16 years for manslaughter. His accomplices, Albert Bowers and Jesse Cole, have received 13 years for the same offence. PC Harper's widow, Lissy, said she was in a lost and endless world after her husband was killed in the line of duty just a month after their wedding. Let's speak with Chris Daw QC, criminal barrister and author of Justice on Trial, where he argues to close, I think I'm right in saying, Chris, and good afternoon to you, you argue to close all prisons.
Ian, good afternoon. Yes, I argue to close all prisons as they are now, where they are basically warehouses of crime and do nothing but increase the criminality of the people in them. So if we want to carry on having more and more crime, we should put more and more people in the prisons we've got, which I know lots of people have been arguing for recently. If we want to actually change society for the better and reduce crime, we need to shut these Victorian prisons down and do something else.
Okay, so put that point to one side for a second. Just let's talk about these sentences. You know this territory well. 16 years for manslaughter. Where does that sit in terms of what you might expect for a manslaughter charge or a manslaughter verdict? And is that the most that could have been given?
No, the maximum sentence for a young offender is detention for life. And so there can be an indefinite or life sentence imposed for manslaughter, just as there has to be for murder. A sentence of 16 years for manslaughter against a teenage defendant is a very, very high sentence in our system indeed. Very harsh sentence has been handed out by the judge, and rightly so.
Harsh? You say harsh? I mean, harsh as in...
Very high sentences.
Oh,
absolutely.
Okay. I thought you said it was a harsh sentence.
Yes, it is a harsh sentence for a 19 or 18, 19-year-old.
Is that relevant if you're 18 or 19? Is that relevant, Chris?
It's relevant to sentencing because younger offenders, as they're still called in this country, are generally speaking receive lower sentences than more mature offenders in recognition of the fact that they are young, they are still developing, and youth sentencing has always been somewhat lower than sentencing for mature, sophisticated adult criminals.
In a case such as this, of course, it was the prosecution were hoping that a murder charge would stick. It didn't. It was therefore manslaughter. But it was particularly brutal. There was the details of this are deeply upsetting. Would the nature of the way that PC Harper died have played a part in the way that a judge would have sentenced in this respect?
Yeah, absolutely. Judges nowadays are required to give consideration to the whole of the circumstances of the crime, to the background of the offender, and even to a degree to the victim impact statements of obviously the widow and other family members. I mean, it's a deeply tragic case, but the fact is that a jury of 11 men and women in this country decided that those young men didn't intend to kill, didn't intend to cause serious bodily harm, and therefore they weren't sure that there was a murder had been committed. And if the jury is not sure of intent, they must acquit of murder and they must convict only of manslaughter. So the jury did its duty, and in my view, so did the judge.
Yeah, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because we're all armchair judges, of course, in these scenarios, and those that have been on a jury will know that and I've sat in the press gallery in enough cases to see those pleading arguments towards the end of a case, and what you say there, Chris, is absolutely spot on. Of course, if beyond any doubt, etc., if there are any reservations at all, then you can't convict, and that's the way, whether we like it or not, that our justice system works.
It is, and it's sad to me. A lot of the coverage has been critical of the jury and of the verdict, and anyone that's ever done jury service, and I've done hundreds of jury trials over 26 years as a criminal lawyer, and every single juror in every single jury, I believe, takes their duty and their oath to try the case only according to the evidence in court very seriously. And the armchair or media critics or those who are prepared to go on social media and say, what were the jury thinking? They didn't sit through the evidence. They didn't take that oath. They didn't have that solemn public duty to try the case in that way. And they should be very, very careful about criticising jurors in that way, because all of us could be called for jury service. It's mandatory. We have to do it if we're called for it. It's a solemn and important public duty. So it's really quite wrong to be so critical of a verdict when you haven't seen the evidence and you didn't have the responsibility, as those jurors did, of taking this very, very difficult decision.
Indeed. In terms of, however, the sentence, I mean, you say given the age, it's quite unusual to have 16 years in the studio. We were speculating. We thought perhaps this would be about 8 years. That may be where this would go. But 16 years, in many respects, is surprising. But to many people, and I'm sure you have, the worst thing about being a QC is going to a party, of course, isn't it? Because everybody wants to talk to you in a kitchen.
Well, nowadays people text me about it.
Yes,
I don't even have to go to a party.
and everybody wants to know why is it? How can you represent someone when you know? And all of those questions, you'd have gone through that a gazillion times. But there is a very natural response that we all have when you think, given the nature of what happened here and given the brutality of PC Harper's death, it seems to many people listening to this, including myself, Chris, that 16 years, what are you going to serve? 2/3 of that for something like this? These guys are going to be out walking the street. They'll be free birds before their 30th birthday. That doesn't, to many people, sound like justice.
Why not? I've written a whole book about this, Ian, and every single system of justice in the world that follows the approach that you're suggesting of locking young people up, teenagers, for 20 or 30 years has off-the-scale levels of violent crime. America locks teenagers up for life without parole for violent crimes. And look at the state of their streets. Would you want to live in most of their inner cities? The fact is, and as I say in the book, it's called Justice on Trial, and I find justice guilty in the book of locking up too many young people for too long.
But
not the other way round.
But they don't commit any crimes when they're locked up, of course, Chris.
No, but society as a whole has more crime. Look at America. They have 2.3 million people in prison.
I get it.
And they have massive levels of violence.
But do you get more violence? So does tough sentences beget violence then?
Absolutely, because what happens is you breed violence into the individual. Even the judge in this case was using language like, you are professional criminals. If you call someone a professional criminal, don't expect them to go and get a job as a plumber. Expect them to behave the way you call them and you treat them. And that's what we do in our system.
What else do you call a professional criminal? What else? I mean, if you're a professional criminal and you're a judge, to point that out is surely fairly standard fare, I would have thought, in a court.
Well, only if you're trying to use language with the greatest of respect that is more likely to have an impact on the public gallery and the media than it is on the individuals you're sentencing. Because if you want the people in front of you, when they come out of prison,
And I think we've lost Chris's line on that almost bombshell aspect of this debate.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we've got you back, Chris. Are you there, sir?
I'm still here. I'm still looking at your tanned face.
Well, that's very kind. I can't see yours at the moment, sadly. But do answer this, though, Chris, if you can. I mean, are you saying then that in a case such as this, if a judge has said you are career criminals or something to that effect, then they're going to go to jail and they will harbour that line and then come out and continue to be violent? Or are you saying that somebody currently on the streets will hear about that and become violent on their behalf?
No, I tell the story in the book of a young man called Gethin Jones who stood at the age of 20 being sentenced in court, and the judge said, you'll never amount to anything. You're a professional criminal. And he went to prison at the age of 20. He got a heroin habit in prison and was then in and out of prison for 20 years. And what good did that remark do to him? It just destroyed him as a human being. What you need to do is you need to ask yourself a serious question. Do we want the people in our criminal justice system to come out safer individuals, less likely to commit crime, or do we want to warehouse them so that they become psychopathic criminals who will commit crime after crime after crime for the rest of their lives?
I've got a better idea, Chris. I can solve that. We can write another book between us, and that would be this, because I would take your idea of closing all the prisons and reopen the prisons, and I'm absolutely hugely pro-rehabilitation. I think you owe it to the next potential victim, if nothing else, to rehabilitate people. I agree and echo the point you made that in so many cases, I don't want a psychopath to be released from prison. I want to think that that person's going to come out and can make their life better and everybody else is around them. But there might be some cases where you don't want to release them from prison. And that's the missing part of the jigsaw, isn't it?
Well, there's 60 at the moment in this country who are serving whole life.
Only 60 people. You think of the horrible, grimy crimes that go on a weekly basis. There's only 60 people actually serving a whole life sentence.
I'll tell you about America again, Ian. There are 60,000 in America serving life without parole. And are their streets the haven of safety that you're after?
But it isn't just about the haven of safety. It's about being punished for the crime you've committed.
But if the punishment means that you end up with more crime and more victims, how's that good for society? But that's what you get. That's what America's got.
If you drag another human being a mile down the road at speed in your car to the point that all of their clothes and most of their skin is removed from their torso, resulting in catastrophic brain damage, and they die, 8, 9, 10 years in jail doesn't seem to be reasonable for that crime, Chris.
Why not? You see, you heard the widow of PC Harper saying very truthfully and searingly honestly in her grief, nothing was going to make a difference. Nothing was going to bring him back. The verdict in a criminal trial and the sentence in a criminal trial isn't going to bring her husband back. It's not going to reverse time and mean that he didn't die in those appalling circumstances. The only thing you can do with sentencing, with the criminal justice system, is try to make fewer widows. And what I'm arguing for in the book and what I'm trying to put forward here is the way that we are advocating tougher and tougher, longer and longer sentences means more widows and means more. I met the mothers of people whose sons have been killed in knife crime, in gang attacks, in knife crime. I've sat in their living room, I've talked to them, I've heard them, I've seen I don't want to have to do that again. And the arguments that are being made in the furore of this verdict, in the furore of this sentence, are going to be more widows and more mothers without their sons.
But if you
that's what we need to have a serious conversation.
Okay, a final point on that, just so I can get this right, Chris. If there is a group of kids living on a housing estate in a challenging part of this country somewhere where life's a bit rubbish, I get all of that, they've turned to crime, they take out a knife, they kill a friend, and they go to jail in this hypothetical world for the rest of their life. The remaining gang members, would they not instinctively look at that? Is it not part of the human condition, instinct and proclivity to respond to that by thinking, I don't want that to happen to me? You seem to be contending that if their mate goes to jail forever, that will increase the chances of more knife crime.
Well, I'm not contending it, it's a fact. Every system...
Why would that be?
Well, the reason for that is because young people, when they go out with a knife or when they use a knife, are not thinking, I'm going to get caught for it and I'm going to get 20 or 50 years for it. Yeah. When they go out in America, they're facing the potential death penalty, and they don't think about that either. So deterrence as a concept based on heavy sentencing, the evidence is crystal clear. I talk about it in the book. If you go to Norway, they send hardly anyone to prison.
But you're saying it increases the chances if they get a heavy sentence.
It increases it because they're not afraid of it. I interviewed people in Alabama for the book, and I asked, prison governors who have had to execute people on death row, and I told this in detail in the book, that they've had to execute people. I said, and they've all said to me, these people did not get up in the morning thinking I might be executed in the future if I do this crime. They do it because their life circumstances have driven them to that point. And you're absolutely right, you hit the nail on the head. He told me, the governor of one of the most secure prisons in the United States, who had executed 22 people, he said to me, it's a badge of honor to get life without parole on the streets for a 20-year-old. A badge of honor to be locked up for the rest of your life. So by all means, go for it. But I'll tell you what, Ian, you will not have fewer teen criminals. You'll have more. And the evidence is, there's no doubt about it. Every page of my book screams the story that if you follow the approach of tough on crime, Old Testament justice, you get more crime and more violence and more victims. Okay. And that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy when people ask for things and then they really don't know, and they don't bargain for what they're going to get.
It's always good to lock horns. Chris, great to have you on, sir, as ever. Chris Daw QC, criminal barrister, author of Justice on Trial. He's written a book, in case you didn't catch that. So, yes, you heard what he had to say on it. It doesn't work. Longer sentences, yeah, it sounds good, makes us all feel a little better. Is it that? It doesn't actually make me feel a little better. I just wonder whether it's the right thing. 0344 499 1000 to respond what you just heard the QC say. You're listening to Ian Collins on Talk Radio.